And just waiting for that record light to... Okay, welcome everyone to the March 2022 Microsoft 365 Modern Management Meetup. So leading today's session, there's me, Mark O'Shea, and I'll let Stephen and Ben do quick introductions as well.
Stephen, I work at Microsoft.
I'm Ben, I do not work at Microsoft. Was that good?
Okay, and I think we have set the tone for the next hour or so with that comment. Okay, so we've got a fairly focused session this month. Rather than trying to cover too many things, instead we'll cover a topic that will deliberately expand into potentially too many things, because with conditional access, you know, it's pretty easy to start sort of looking at where it starts sort of reaching out into a whole bunch of other things. But we'll try to focus just on things that are device-based. Now, that doesn't mean that other elements won't come into play here, but for the scenarios that we've already sort of chosen to go through and some of the topics that you'll see shortly, the idea wasn't just to sort of do a general purpose conditional access revisit, because we did a conditional access session. Like, to me, it feels like it was 6 months ago, which means it's probably happened somewhere in the last 30 months or so. But I've got a feeling it wasn't all that long ago. But there have been enough changes on the conditional access side with some of the different device capabilities, things that are in preview, other things that not strictly conditional access, but close enough that we will include those in here. Now, I guess just before we do jump in to talk about the CA related topics, is if there's anyone new or who hasn't been around for a while who just wants to do a quick introduction, either via chat, text chat, or if you want to just drop like unmute for a second to introduce yourself, either option is fine. But if you don't feel like it, you know, once again, don't stress too much about it.
Sure, and just letting everyone know that I'm a little under the weather with tooth-based surgery, so I'll be monitoring the chat and maintaining that.
I think that's pretty good awkward pause there, Mark.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, I was sort of waiting for ellipses to appear in chat, but I didn't see anything. So I guess that means we can continue on in the presentation. So for this, as I mentioned, we'll focus mostly on the on device-based policies. There are a few other areas that we will need to touch on because of other things that some of these new policies or the default policies they're building in do actually touch upon. But just as a bit of an overview as to what we'll be covering off, just so that you know what to expect coming up. So realistically, we probably could have stripped out everything after the preview device templates, because the reality is that the preview templates do a pretty good job of covering a broad set of things that, you know, either you've already been doing with conditional access when it comes to using using device identity as the control plane. But it's the thing that I think is important with these is just to get a bit of an idea as to, you know, I guess just what the Azure AD team's recommendations are in terms of these. Now, I don't think there's anything in here overall that's too surprising once you see what what the default settings are with these new templates that they've included in preview. But there are definitely some interesting takeaways across a few of them. So I've gone through and just sort of copied the details into the next few slides so that you can see what's included with each of those, just to get a bit of an idea and hopefully give a few talking points, or get you to ask a few questions based on why did they do these things this way instead of other ways. Now, one of the other things that I really wanted to cover in here, actually, there's two things in particular in here that I did really want to cover off, because they're things that have changed a bit over probably since the last time we covered off conditional access, which is now that we've got device filtering exposed directly in conditional access, that starts to open up some, some of the other possibilities that we were seeing over on the Intune side. But then another thing that's also changed recently is some of the guidance that you're starting to see around the trust device for X number of days type settings that we could get through the, what's the correct term for that? I'm not supposed to call it the legacy MFA portal, we'll call it the classic MFA portal. Even it is starting to give some recommendations about using conditional access if you're appropriately licensed for it.
Mm-hmm. Do you mean the phone factor portal?
Yes, good old phonefactor.net. So there's a few things in there. And then the final three, like the device compliance, approved client apps, and app protection, nothing too drastic to cover off in the last two. But with device compliance, there's something that we'll cover off that is a preview change that doesn't directly affect your devices, but does affect devices, or could potentially affect devices coming in from other tenants in a very, very good way, thankfully. So if there's anything else that you can think of that you did want covered off as part of this, just sort of make sure to drop a comment into chat so that we can sort of make sure that we can cover it if it's related to one of these things. But I guess the first thing then is just to sort of talk about, the device template. So I've only included the, so all we'll really do here is talk about the device templates, even though there are other templates for the user identity side. We won't cover those because we wanted to keep things fairly focused here, but we'll go through each of these in more detail as we go through. But what I've really just done for the next few slides is, by few, I mean the next 6 slides, is I've just grabbed the policy summary information for each of these, just so you can start getting an idea of what each of these do. Now, I guess for me, I'm actually looking forward to this session because probably for the last 6 to 12 months, anytime I've had to talk about conditional access or Azure AD outside of this particular environment is basically I've had to sort of remember for that target audience that when we talk about Azure AD identity, it has to equate to a user identity as opposed to the device identity. So for me, it's actually a welcome break to actually go back to talking about devices here, rather than going through some of those some of those other policies. But I guess just the first thing that I want to check with everyone is how many of you were aware that these templates, that these preview policy templates for CA have been available for a couple of months, at least in the Azure portal. Or Azure, sorry, I shouldn't say Azure portal, under conditional access, based on where you get conditional access from. So how many of you were aware, or if you weren't aware, just sort of drop a comment into chat.
So a couple of hands, but I would say the majority did not.
Yeah, and so if we just sort of take a look at how we, how do we get to that? I think the reason why it would be really easy to miss this is if you're just working, if you've already got your policy set up and configured already and everything's working the way you've wanted, or you've just had to go through and tweak existing ones, you probably haven't had to come up here to new policy and click on that. And all of a sudden now you notice, new policy is actually a drop down, not just a button. Mm-hmm. So from here, we can just choose that create new policy from template. And I'll just sort of quickly show you that there are, 3, 4, 5, so 8. So 8 of these, I guess, user identity policies. But let's just go back to the previous one. Now, the thing to watch out for with this, it's not a showstopper by any means, but depending on what screen res you're using and what zoom or DPI you're using in here, or what scaling you're using, what you'll find is that you may not realize that you can actually name the policy prior to clicking next. But if that area is off screen, you'll create the policy and it's just got this default name. But good news is we can easily rename those policies, so it's not a problem if you choose the wrong one. Awesome. That was something that I missed the first few times that I created this. It's like, why do I have to keep going back and changing the name? And it's like, oh, because I'm zooming in to show people so they can actually read it on screen, as opposed to my preferred mode of sort of being zoomed out like that and making it unreadable for everyone else. So
I hope you raised a support ticket on that, Mark, and then looked very foolish.
No. It wasn't enough of an issue, but this is basically 90% of supporting people who are new to Azure Portal, is telling them to scroll up or down or zoom in or out. That is 90% of Azure Portal support. That setting's not there. It is, but you've got a 720p display on your laptop, and the Azure Portal does not really like it very much. Okay, so from here we can just go through. I won't actually sort of pick them out yet because we'll talk about them in detail. But all I've done, as I've mentioned, is I've just chosen the policy summaries because that just gives you a breakdown of what's in each of them. And what you'll notice as we go through these is we could probably make changes, immediately based on what our requirements are for some of these. But for others, it's interesting seeing what they're bringing, what they're bringing in here and what we can take away from them. So the first one, I call this one the Steve slide because it mentions hybrid Azure AD joint device. And we know that Steve loves hybrid Azure AD joint. Okay, now, I guess the first thing that I want to sort of call out here is and this is something that's going to be consistent, I think, through most of these slides for this section, is the excluded users. Not that it's not something that I really view as a conditional access issue. It's more a matter of what account are you, or how are you actually using roles inside the organization. So even if you're using something like PIM and you're just, basically, requesting the permissions that you need on your regular user account as opposed to having a secondary admin account, then this current user is going to put you as your day-to-day account, which you probably don't want in there as an excluded user. So I think this, and I'm pretty sure for most of you, when people are asking you questions about, with PIM, does that mean that we don't need that second admin account? It's like, to me, this is just another reason why that second admin account for anything admin is still something that you really, really should be doing. And I think going back a few months, there was a Twitter conversation where people were sort of saying, well, if we do that second account, it means that we've got to get twice as many licenses or things like that for Azure AD Premium P2.
Sure.
But I think I'm pretty sure it was one of the Alexes I think it was Alex Simons came back and said, oh, no, you definitely don't need that. It's your, basically, you as the user having two accounts doesn't mean that you need two licenses for that stuff. And I think then that you can probably kind of imagine everyone said, documentation, please. And I think eventually something turned up that did. Did you see that one, Ben?
No, I didn't. It's just, it's a very valid concern. I'm quite curious to understand how that works as well. I mean, do you attach the license to the user account?
Well, yeah, and I think that was where the questions were coming from. But I think it might be one of those things where, and someone might be able to confirm this or not. I'm curious with PIM if it's something where, is PIM looking at it at the tenant level, or is PIM looking at it on a per user license level? So if PIM sees that that you've got one P2 license in, then PIM functionality is enabled regardless of whether it's assigned to the user, even though the user's supposed to have it.
Oh, so is it one of those magical things where I think you just need,
Yeah, I think so I've got a suspicion that might be the way. So it might actually be a matter of, that way that it kind of works accidentally more than,
sure,
well, not accidentally, but the design, that initial design where they weren't really enforcing it.
Sure. Well, I for one would like to put my hand up and say documentation, please, because that sounds not right. But have no reason not to believe it.
Yeah, and I guess when you've got one of the two like lead Azure AD people coming out and saying this is the truth, then if it's not the truth, it probably has to become the truth very, very shortly afterwards.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. So just with that one there with excluded users, I didn't. Yeah. So if we're assuming that it's an admin, like a dedicated admin account, even in that case, excluding that user from some of these policies, okay, yeah, I guess we'd always want to have that break glass account excluded, but some of these just are a little bit more cautious because they don't know what your break glass account is, for example. So there are some of these things that you'll see are fairly consistent, that the current user is usually going to be excluded from these, which can end up being problematic in some cases in terms of being a little bit too lenient.
Sure.
Okay, so now the second part of it, the included directory roles. Like, I'm sure there's logic behind the roles that they've got included in here, but my take on this is they just sort of chose some of the more widely used roles. Not to say that this is the wrong list or the right list. I think the reality is this is probably just the beginning of the list, because there are potentially going to be a lot more directory roles that we do want included in here. Now, the thing that that I find interesting in this one is, no Intune related roles are listed in, or Intune direct related roles are in here, whether that's a deliberate omission or an accidental omission. It could be, you could probably argue
management.
You could argue either way, that they're saying, maybe they get that, basically they're being treated as a break glass type of account in this situation. So but even some of the other ones though, like things that, if you've got things like Exchange admin and SharePoint admin in there, like to me, it's like, well, why isn't Teams admin in there? So I think, my guess here is and unless maybe they've got it fully documented somewhere, but my assumption on this one is they've just tried to put in a fairly broad set of admin roles. But this would be one that I would especially say that is going to be the starting point, not what you would really end up with as the final result there.
Sure.
Now, Steve, do you have anything to add about cloud apps?
Yes. Don't block all apps. Please don't block all apps and then go in and say, well, I'm going to allow these based on these scenarios. We do have apps that are not necessarily fully visible in the list of apps for cloud apps in conditional access. The list is getting smaller, but right now there is some applications, as an example, the subscription application, or subscription verification application. So how you get your enterprise licensing authorized isn't actually published in the list. So if you block all apps and then only allow the ones you want, you'll run into these issues. So yeah, just don't think you need to block everything and then allow only what you want. No.
Yeah.
This is where you're putting additional controls over the components that you want to make secure.
See, but
default permission is good.
Yeah, I can see where, though, for some organizations, that's just not the mindset they've got. They've got to block everything, and then, any who are sort of saying, let's lock things down like crazy, then figure out what we need to open up. This would be a perfect example where that mindset is going to cause, major issues.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's the same logic as, like locking your firewall down completely and then poking holes through it. Like, it's a fairly standard approach to, security remediation. So what you're saying, while it makes total sense, does sort of fly in the face of that, which is quite funny.
It's an interesting change of mentality, but yes, it's something you should pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Yeah, because I guess it's, even if you sort of think about, the way that some people might choose to interpret what zero trust means. It's like block everything by default and then choose what you allow in. And it's like, not for this one. This one is different. Now, the final two grant access. No real surprises down here. We've got requiring the device to be marked as compliant or required hybrid Azure AD joined device. Now, thankfully, something that I haven't heard somebody ask recently, I think there's potentially enough knowledge out there now to realize this, is that sometimes people used to think that that second option of requiring a hybrid joined device was almost a get out of jail free card for letting a non-compliant device through, which I guess you could say it is if you've got a pretty crappy on-prem environment where you don't have any kind of compliance solution in place or compliance enforcement solution. But with that one, and this is something that goes back years, is it is reminding people that they should have something related to this, already in an on-prem environment to determine is a device considered trustworthy. And if you're choosing to treat this as an on-prem first device, which is what you're saying, which is what you're doing here, it would be your on-prem remediation and control would be the more important factors overall.
Right. So what you're essentially saying there, Mark, is that if you don't have on-prem compliance set up, then you need to, because
yeah,
okay,
and I think this is, and I think where part of this came, where you sort of see the challenges with this. If it was like going back a few years when there was still a lot more like of your on-prem infrastructure in an SMB environment, they would be ones who would potentially be, not realizing that choosing that option was basically saying non-compliant devices or devices that have got no compliance whatsoever, apart from being domain joined, which isn't really a compliant setting, would be able to get through. Whereas in the enterprise space, they would have had a bunch of different things working together for that. But I think now it's probably just less of an issue overall, because the number of SMBs who just don't have the infrastructure of 5 or 10 years ago. So I think that issue that confusion has kind of it's not eliminated, but it's just not as much of an issue that it used to be.
Yeah.
Okay, what have we got next? Okay, so blocking access for unknown or unsupported device platform. Now, once again, included users and excluded users, pretty much everyone in current user, same issue that we saw before. Now, what I like about this one is that they're showing, like, just to sort of see what they're doing with the different policies. In this one, they're actually saying allow everything in terms of the any device for included device platforms, but then they're adding the block list of Android, iOS, Windows, and Mac. Now, moving forward, I guess they don't have it in here because it's in preview, but Linux is now a supported platform, or sorry, I shouldn't say supported, it's supported in preview. So that would be another potential change that you'd be making in here. But otherwise, I don't think there's anything too special overall about this one. But really it's the final two. It's the, saying that we're going to have a specific exclude list, and then we're going to choose to block access as opposed to allowing access with this one. So again, you can just sort of see that there's a slight variation in terms of the approach they're taking. So ignoring what it is they're trying to achieve, you can still see, this is where we can see that, things that this would answer a question where someone says, like how could I include any device and then exclude? Because there's not really anything in the conditional access UI that gives you an idea of which one wins, include or exclude. Whereas what this shows you is that exclude overrides include. Otherwise the policy just wouldn't work. Okay, what have we got up? Anything else anyone wants to call out on that one, or is that one? I think that one's pretty straightforward.
Where's the BlackBerry?
Where's the hip top, the sidekick?
That's in the.
Where's Symbian?
That's supported by the included device platforms, which are then excluded. Yeah.
Does it include Windows Phone?
Well, no, Windows Phone is still in there. So you could choose Windows Phone, but weirdly that they don't include Windows Phone in the excluded device platforms.
I know it.
Yeah, wonder why. Why would they do that? Yeah, it's still, yeah, people who haven't seen that UI still chuckle when they see it for the first time and see Windows Phone listed. So now this one starts to mix things up a bit. So the first three, included and excluded users and cloud apps, no surprises. But all of a sudden, for no persistent browser session, now we are getting into the device filtering. So again, slight starting to introduce some variations to see how could we actually use these. Now, I'm going to jump in some of the upcoming slides to do some comparisons around the properties, like a comparison of the properties that you can get through your device filtering versus dynamic groups, because there definitely are differences there. But in terms of your operators and your and/or type statements, those are pretty much identical. But there are some things that filtered devices does that are actually, like, hands down, destroy dynamic groups in terms of simplifying the experience and making the options more relevant for you. So we'll take a look at some of those ones pretty soon. So in this case, you can see that for the filtering, that the trust type does not equal hybrid Azure AD join, or is compliant not equals true. So basically saying we've got devices that we don't trust. Now, just to be clear here, I didn't put all the text on this slide that I could have put on, because if we jump into this one and we just take a look here, the description in here, no persistent browser session, protect user access on unmanaged devices by preventing browser sessions from remaining signed in after the, that's quite a sentence. But basically you can see in here is that so even though I'm sort of showing you the settings without the full context. So this is one where I think the others, the context is kind of obvious. This one, I think that description does give a bit more, background as to why are we doing it here. So unmanaged devices, and basically not letting browser sessions be persistent, and basically, forcing, re-authentication after that 1 hour period. Yep, so there we go, that sign-in frequency, 1 hour, persistent browser session, never persistent. Now, some of the links that I'll bring up a bit later will sort of give you a bit more background around, exactly what is that sign-in frequency, how is it calculated. So I've made sure to drop a few links into the speaker notes, and I'll drop those in when we get to those pieces specifically. Now, for this one, for the approved client apps and app protection, so basically they've rolled both of these into one, and probably again, for the included and excluded users and cloud apps, no surprises. But what I like here with the included device platforms is that they're just calling out immediately that this applies to Android and iOS. So is somebody trying to just go through and say, I want some of these same settings for Windows, and choosing Windows, it's not going to work here. Now, there is a special gotcha use case scenario that I'll talk about around, what is it? I think it affects Skype for Business and Visio client on iOS and Android. That
people still use Skype for Business.
You and I both know people who still use Skype for Business, Steve. Come on,
they've converted.
Yeah. So there's, I think, so they might, I don't think that, as far as I know, they're the only two that are kind of referenced, but they would be two that this policy would not actually work for. But I guess the Skype for Business, I think we could mostly say that, that's something where we could sort of see a specific time frame where that is potentially going to become a non-issue for most orgs. Now, the Visio one, a little bit different, but remember, we're talking about Visio on mobile devices here. We're not talking about something that's going to impact Visio on a desktop OS. And I'll cover off the scenario how we address that once we get into that section in particular. Now, down here.
So, Mark, and I'm going to ask you a dumb question, because I haven't had time to look into it, but I know with iPads now and the bigger iPads, they are starting to appear as Mac OS. Does that get included in here?
So far it has. So far, I think. So everything that I can see so far is that Azure AD isn't really differentiating between them the same way that Intune would be, for example. So basically, there's no breakdown yet between. Actually, let's just verify that because things change. So let's make sure that that is the case. Let's just do it from here.
Just to completely derail the conversation.
Oh no, it's
demo time.
Let's just jump in and take a look at conditions and see what's in there. Yeah, it's still just iOS.
And Mac OS.
But there's, but there's our, but there we go. There's good old Windows Phone is in here and the Linux preview. So two of the things we've mentioned are actually in there. So I guess then the question is, if they're not doing the differentiation yet at the conditional access or at the Azure AD layer, is it because there's not enough information available to Azure AD to really make a solid distinction between the two? Is that something that's more likely to?
I think it comes down to this is coming down to the application executing on the device, not Safari returning back, whether it's Mac OS or iPad OS. I think.
Yeah, because if you take a look, because it would be, because both of them are going to be mobile apps. The mobile apps will be able to report what they're actually running on the Intune side. But I guess, what connection string would they be using? Yeah, I guess there's probably not a reason why Azure AD couldn't figure it out. Maybe it's just not something that's a top priority for them. And they're saying
Nathan's going to tell us that we're wrong.
Yeah, Nathan's got his hand up. You have the floor.
Is it that silly thing that Microsoft was doing before about if the screen size is less than 10.5 inches, it's considered a mobile device? And if the screen size is larger than that, then it's a PC or some.
There used to be so I know that stuff. They were doing a lot of that stuff on the Windows side, going back to try to determine when they were sort of doing the post netbook era, when they were trying to get cheaper. Like, remember Windows with Bing?
Yep.
Yes, that was a product that OEMs could preload. So there was a period where some of that stuff was being used, and I think it was also where the even though I think I'm pretty sure you can still download them, but the mobile Office apps as well. There was some weird licensing, even though they were free apps. There were some weird licensing rules around, is it a mobile device or is it a PC? So in this case, I think it's probably just more that the app. Well, here I guess the challenge here that you might have is that, and why maybe there isn't going to be that kind of differentiator happening here, is because we could have that iOS versus iPad OS conversation, but we could also have an Android versus Android L conversation as well for the large screen versions, where they could potentially be running a native app designed for the larger screen, or it could just be scaling up the phone app. So I think I guess there's still some similarities there, but I haven't seen anything too specific on like why it's not trying to expose both of them. I think the Android side is probably more of a recent thing, so if it lags, no challenge, no concern. But the iOS one, they've had plenty of time to address that if it's something that they did want to address or could address.
Yeah, my guess is it comes down to that client app having the MAM plugins and the SDKs, but
yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to see if you knew, because I don't. That's
And so then with the grant access, so this is where this one is interesting, is that they have rolled this into both. And they've made it so if we just sort of switch, let me just sort of provision this one quickly so we can take a look. So I just want to show that final part of it, which is, yes, I should have gone and changed the name, but this will remind me that it's one that I should delete.
So you put emojis in there, that helps you.
Yeah.
Is there a delete me emoji? Well, a trash can. A trash can.
Yeah. Just the vomit emoji.
Yep.
Yeah. So down here. So this is probably a good opportunity to talk about something else that we were discussing before we kicked off, which is what you'll notice with the control with the grant options that you're seeing through these samples they're providing is that they're generally sticking to require one of the selected controls as opposed to making them as opposed to you needing multi controls. And just what it seems like here, and maybe someone can jump in and give their feedback on this one as well, but it just seems like that they're trying not to, that kind of that meeting two requirements isn't really part of the best practices anymore. Instead, we'd have two policies, each applying their own requirement. And I don't know if anyone's actually seen anything, confirming that. So, Kwok, I don't know if you've seen anything about them, saying, better to have more policies officially than trying to jam too many requirements into grant and that potentially becoming problematic. Because if you remember back to the old days of, some of the examples you'd see things like maybe one of these selected, but then require MFA was also selected, and it would be require all of the selected controls. Whereas these examples that we'll take a look at here, as far as I saw, none of them use all of the selected controls. Everything is require one of those selected controls here.
Hey,
Okay.
Mark.
Yeah.
Require app protection policy used to break Teams. I hope that's not the case anymore. Because Teams, all the Microsoft 365 apps on iOS, all the there's probably about 3 different authentication methods depending on the app that you're in. And Teams uses Safari to complete the authentication.
Yeah.
Safari doesn't meet the app protection policy requirement, therefore you couldn't sign into Teams.
Oh, because it uses the Safari engine as the auth layer.
Yeah, it's the web something or other.
Yeah, so I didn't see anything about that being, I can dig in, but I didn't see anything about that being excluded. And so I'm kind of hoping that now Safari is, or that it basically they're using, both across Android and iOS, either using Authenticator or the company portal app as the broker, rather than using the browser as the broker. Or even if you're using one of those, and then it can then talk, maybe it just means that maybe Edge needs to get, put on, even though it would still be Safari rebranded as Edge. Now, for some reason, that might be because one of the policies that I've got disabled at the moment was actually from the one was sort of testing some stuff with Defender and compliance. It was actually specifically targeting Teams. So I'm wondering if that was why. I wonder if that was part of the reason I was using Teams for that one. I'm not sure. Okay, now up next. So again, nothing too special in terms of the first few options in here for the compliant or hybrid Azure AD joined device. So once again, it's in this case, if you take a look at the grant access option here, just sort of notice here that, to me, this is one that you could potentially break out to 2 different options or to 2 different policies here. Because once we get down here, I view this as something that we probably want to, treat our Windows devices potentially quite differently to how we're treating our Mac devices based on what we're doing down there. Especially because of the hybrid Azure AD joined device. But in this example, they've just sort of broken it into, or they've just sort of kept it all as one. To me, okay, if it works, it works. But I guess for me, this was one that probably if someone said, how would you design for these two for Windows and Mac, I probably wouldn't have started off with a goal of putting them into one policy.
Yeah, neither would I.
Yeah, and I guess for me here especially, if this is one where we could require, this is for me, this also for me seems like more like a situation where we might want to require 2 criteria on the grant access side to be met. Because in this case, all we're saying is that if you can do MFA on the Windows side, your device doesn't have to be marked as compliant and it doesn't have to be Azure AD joined. So to me, the MFA piece is almost giving a workaround to someone who's got a non-compliant device. Am I interpreting that incorrectly? I don't know.
Yeah, MFA will allow you to connect no matter what. So if your device is not compliant, you can MFA and get access.
Yeah.
Would I personally suggest that? No.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing here, and that's the policy as it is. So this is one that to me would be one where I would, maybe on the Mac OS side, I'd be obviously the Azure AD joint piece couldn't come through, but to me this is just a weird one.
Compliant.
This is a weird one to me. I'd want I'd want to remove, part of me just wants to strip out MFA, but they've deliberately included it as part of their, it's part of the description. Now let's take a look at the portal just to see if there's anything in there that gives a bit more insight as to why they're doing things that kind of aren't sitting right with some of us. Yeah, nothing too special. It's basically
saying you have to be MFA'd or you have to be on a trusted device, which for some organizations that may well be acceptable to sit there and go, well, okay, your device isn't compliant, your device isn't hybrid AD joined, but you've MFA'd, so that's okay, and I'm going to constantly MFA you, and you're going to go and do something or do action. Most organizations nowadays will sit there and go, we want your device to be compliant or it needs to be hybrid AD joined. Why you want device compliance is it's also going to be for your network access control when you're connecting to Wi-Fi and things like that to force you to do those updates.
Because I guess because if you take a look at the one above it, because here the require compliant device, that one is only in there for admins.
That's right.
So basically they're being a bit more aggressive in terms of what the admin requirements are. But then down here, to me, that just feels like they're being a little bit too loose with the end user requirements.
Yeah, exactly.
But I guess if it fits the org's policy, if they're not quite at the point where they know that everything is configured properly, but I'd still be in my mind, I've just, even on the Windows side, I'm sort of breaking this down into multiple policies going, okay, if you've got a hybrid Azure AD joined device, but you don't have a good on-prem compliance solution, then I'd make the policy that it targets Windows, it's hybrid Azure AD joined, and you have to go through MFA, as opposed to one or the other. So for me, that one is the one that just sort of, it hurts my brain. I want to make this one multiple policies that are more restrictive. But then as default templates, maybe the goal isn't to make them too restrictive and end up locking everyone out of the organization. So
that's why the exclusion when you create the policy is for current user. So I think we've glossed over that pretty well, but whenever you're using these templates, you're going to be excluded from that policy.
Yeah.
By default. That's why you shouldn't be using your personal account for that. It should be
your admin,
your global admin that account is separate. Yes. Or ideally your break glass account.
Okay, so that one, so that's probably the one that I've got. The others, I don't really think I had any real issues with that one. I'll give it room for improvement, even if it means splitting it into 2 or 3, but at least they've given a starting point. Now, the final one, the app enforced restrictions, this one causes a bit of confusion. So let's just jump in and take a look at what this one has. So in this one, what this is doing is giving us the option of having somebody who's got an unmanaged device come through and access effectively a scaled back experience with Exchange Online and SharePoint Online. So effectively going into more of a, let's say you want to restrict it so that it's more of a read-only view. So someone's traveling, for some reason they lose their work device, but they've got their own personal unmanaged device, letting them to sort of get in, look at a document, call someone up and say it's approved or something along those lines. But where this one, I think, this one potentially, I think, could cause confusion is because we're choosing because we're choosing Office 365 as the cloud app here, as opposed to choosing SharePoint and Exchange Online. People might think that this one goes a little bit further than it does. But if we just jump in and create that one, so let's see what we've got. So probably one of the good things here with the app enforced restrictions is if you take a look at the way they've got that description in there, or the way that it was described from within that was from that slide, it was talking about OneDrive, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Exchange Online. The problem is if we where people, again, a trick, or not a trick, but something that sort of impacts people initially that they kind of learn pretty quickly is that in most cases, if someone's saying I can't find whatever setting for OneDrive, and it's like, well, because you'll never find OneDrive because it's everything is under SharePoint. Whereas previously I would have, this would, for this one, like prior to that O365 one becoming available, like you would have said choose SharePoint, you would have chosen Exchange Online, but then you would have had someone say, but what about OneDrive? Well, now I guess choosing Office 365 at least eliminates that part from the conversation. So yeah, and with this one, let's see. Last time I looked at this, there were some product names that were out of date, and they are still terribly out of date. Microsoft Flow
still exists, so does Forms.
I mean, what?
Office 365 Yammer, that's still there.
When you use Power Automate, Steve, do you create a flow in Power Automate?
Yes, I do.
Okay, cool. Then it's fine. Flow still exists.
Yep. Well, I still synchronize with Groove, so there.
I pity you. You're still using the Groove agent.
Well, that's what Office 365 still calls it.
Well, they give you the option to not use the Groove agent.
Yeah, true. Yeah, exclude equals Groove, exclude equals link. I'm thinking of my Office XML files.
Yes.
Yes.
Specifically, if you haven't specified in your Office Click to Run installer to exclude the Groove client, then you're doing something wrong.
Oh yeah. Okay, so yeah, because I think if we just sort of then switch back to the slide, that was the last one out of that group. But from there, though, it starts to give you a pretty good idea of what you could start doing from that point onwards. So even with the one before this one, you could see that for me, it raises questions that I could sort of see it would be kind of a good first step in some organizations, but it would be something where I would definitely want to tighten that up pretty quickly. But otherwise, if we just go through a few of the other things then. So I wanted to just sort of talk about some of the, I guess, it's nice now that we've got device filters coming available through conditional access. We've already seen one of those examples. But for me, like having used device groups, whether for users or groups, for a few years now, and having to deal with the it's like, you're not there yet. Yes, I know you're not there yet. No, it hasn't even processed yet. No, how can I tell? I can see it in the portal. It's telling me. No, there's no way I can kind of nudge it along. Yes, I can get it to reprocess by putting a space in there, but it's not going to make it any faster. So with this one, having that option now for device filtering, carrying through to here. Now, does anyone know when this appeared? Because I'm sure it's been in here for many, many months, but it was probably only the last 2 or 3 months that I noticed it.
Let me check now. I've got a feeling I actually saw something about it just recently, but I could be wrong.
I think it was December, January timeframe.
Okay.
It may have actually been November in the
to coincide
AAD
with a particular
portal. Yeah.
Event.
And then it appeared in the Intune MEMAC portal in January timeframe. Don't quote me on it, but I think that's when it started appearing. Because I know I've got a customer that's been using it extensively, and that's when they started doing it.
I'm just scrolling through the internet now.
But it definitely turned up in the AAD portal before it turned up in the MEMAC portal.
Okay, so I guess then, just to sort of cover off a few of the things around this, is like at first glance, like overall, let's just say that there's more similarities than differences. So your first look is not deceiving when you're going, hang on, these look very, very similar to each other. It's like, okay, and that's a good way to think of it. They're very similar, but as soon as we jump to the next slide and start doing some comparisons in terms of what are the different property options that are available to us. So basically we get, obviously there has to be some overlap, but there's, there are a few differences on either side. So device filters give us a whole bunch of different extension attributes, etc. if we need them. On the dynamic device groups, you can see here that, starting off with the account enabled and object ID, neither of those options are over on the device filters. So if someone is trying to sort of position it as a versus conversation, it's only dynamic device groups versus device filtering when they can do exactly the same thing. But there's depending on if it's a fairly simple one, the chances are one or the other could potentially do the job. If it's something that's not going to change all that often, then okay, who do you want to have responsibility for it? The identity team or the device management team? That would really be...
The other part that I'd call out there is dynamic device groups are processed on a schedule, whereas device filterings are when the policy is being executed on the client device.
Yeah.
And that's I mean, that's the important thing to explain why they're significantly better, because they're actually pulled when they need to, not on some magical black box scenario that no one knows.
Oh no, I've lifted straight from the documentation about how the black box works and how non-specific it is.
Excellent.
So in this case, it's so the reality is, if you can use device filters, it's going to be something that is going to be a better longer term option. But one of the things I really like about device filters is it's smarter. So what operators actually apply, or are we looking for when we're creating this? So with dynamic device groups, at first when I was going through this and doing the comparison, at first I was thinking that device, because of the sample, the properties that I was choosing, the operator list was a lot smaller. But what you'll find though is that the operator list is more targeted. So rather than giving you all of the operators, so dynamic device groups will give you that same extensive list of operators, regardless of what it is you're doing, regardless of whether or not only one or two things could possibly be the operators that you're using. Device filters will go through and basically they're filtering the operators based on the property, which to me is a good thing. It means that you're not sitting there going, oh, hang on, is this going to be a match or a contains or an equals? Instead, it's like, oh, okay, I've had a bunch of choices removed from me. Therefore, my day is going to get a lot easier. Because most of the questions, I guess most of the questions that I tend to get around the operator piece is somebody. So up here somewhere, if we were back in the portal, it'd be the little information icon with the more information link, which will explain what each of these are and where you'd use them. And that's what, for most people, is the confusing part is, which of these am I going to use? Now, the reality is that for some of the device filters, you are going to see something closer to that full list. So it's not saying that you don't need to learn what all of them are, but rather than this sort of being like this is kind of like a trial by fire where you've got to try to figure out which of the 20 options it is, as opposed to over here, it's like equals is actually what I'm after, or not, not equals. So device filters kind of just give a bit more of a gentler onboarding process as well. Now, some of the other things, so a few people, Ben and Steve both sort of raised this one up, but dynamic group processing time. Effectively, the answer is how long is a piece of string? So depending on the size of your Azure AD organization, the group may take up to 24 hours populating for the first time or after a rule change. Now, I don't think I've seen any tenant take 24 hours. There's one in particular in New South Wales that I could think of where I'm thinking if it can take up to 24 hours, theirs would be a good candidate for that. Sure. You know who I'm talking about?
I don't, but I've no, actually, now that you say, okay, no, I do now. Yeah.
Somebody who joins us occasionally.
Yes. Yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah, they would be a perfect candidate for taking up to 24 hours. And with this kind of thing, I don't know. I just view this as even though that 24 hours is not the SLA, to me, it just sort of means that, for most people, it's going to be in such a short time period compared to that, though that it's going to be like, oh, wow, that was really quick. It only took 15 minutes. It didn't take 24 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then the next part, though, and this is from the same page. So that's the URL of where I've pulled both of these from. So a smaller number of users will see the group membership changes in less than a few minutes. So notice they're very non-specific wording. Typically, so starting off with typically, not a firm commitment, in less than a few minutes. Now, what technically is a few minutes? Does few mean an exact number?
It's more than 2.
Yeah, because that would be a couple.
2 minutes. Yeah, a couple of minutes.
So it's more than 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And well, it is. Yeah, greater than a few minutes or less than a few minutes is instantaneous. Yeah, in terms of cloud timing, yes. Yeah, less than 2 minutes is real time communications.
Yeah, this is live dynamic filtering. It's what we're saying.
Yeah, and then directories with a larger number of users can take 30 minutes or longer. So I guess that's a better statement than saying usually take 30 minutes or longer to populate. So even in there, if someone just says, oh yeah, Microsoft is documenting how long it takes, it's like me telling you I can predict the age at which you will die. And then I say somewhere between 0 and 150 years is the age in which you will pass away of natural causes. Like, I'm pretty confident that that's 100% accurate. Now, the other thing just to throw into this is the roles and responsibilities, because this is when the device filtering options first came into Endpoint Manager. So when was that? Like a year or so ago. One of the things that we're sort of discussing about it is that, a good thing for the identity admins, because they didn't have to create all of these random dynamic device groups that we needed to meet certain application or application deployment or policy deployment type requirements. So basically we could sort of handle that without getting the identity team involved.
Yeah.
But now with doing it in conditional access, I guess we still, as the non-identity people, we still have to come up with the filters, but then it's the identity people who have to apply the filters. And then this also starts to mean, though, that does this start blowing out the number of policies they'd need to potentially create here? Because if we were doing it via dynamic groups, that means that they could apply that same policy to multiple dynamic groups and mix and match as needed. Whereas in this case, it's almost it's a one-to-one mapping of the policy to the group of filtered devices. So this is something where I could see that there could potentially be some pushback here if there was an ability to do it via dynamic groups instead. So for Blessing, Blessing's got Blessing's got another excellent thing that I completely missed in terms of that description. What's a small number of users versus a large number of users? Pick a number, double it, divide it by 3, add a 0 to the end of it, and you've got your starting point. I don't know what it's the starting point for, but that's the other part of this is that it's, look, and I completely understand why none of this is ever published, because why they don't want to give anything firmer than this, because people will complain and they'll lodge support tickets if it takes 1 or 2 seconds longer than it's supposed to, yet alone if it takes minutes longer than it's supposed to. So I understand why it's somewhat vague, but I also understand why people want more specifics around it. But it's the usual thing. It's cloud, it's shared resources. In a lot of cases, it's just luck of the draw in terms of how busy are things, where are you in the queue, and how quickly will it get processed. There's like who knows what logic is really sits behind the scenes on this one. Okay, what have we got next? Okay, so this one, I only noticed this one going back maybe 2 or 3 weeks, which was over in sorry, Steve, I thought of the official name for it now. What the portal? It's the per user MFA portal.
It is.
Yeah, so we should actually use the official name for it. So over on the per user MFA portal, when you click on settings, a bit of extra text is now appearing here underneath the remember MFA on trusted devices setting, where it's now talking about using conditional access sign-in frequency. So in this case, you can start seeing that this is starting to tie into, I guess we saw the opposite example in the templates. It didn't have a trust devices, it had a don't trust devices. And that was the one that we were seeing that, no browser persistence, and you had to re-authenticate after an hour. So basically they've given an example of the opposite of what this one is. But I think I should have let me just find it. I'll just switch. I've got to switch something over on the other screen so I can find the link to the article that's got the info. Okay, I think I've got it listed on the next page. So let me just sort of jump up. So I think here that learn more about reauth prompts. I think this is what we've got on the next slide is effectively what I've pulled in from that, but there's a couple of links that I'll just copy out of my notes and into chat for you on this one, just to go into a bit more detail on them. This is one that I think this is probably recent enough that I'd be surprised if anyone's got too much feedback on this one yet. Like if anyone does have any feedback, if you've had to investigate it for any of the environments you're working with, my guess is it's probably not even on your radar just yet. Let me grab the second link. So with this one, it's starting to move away from from just choosing that trusted device option. But so this isn't really going into the details. There's quite a bit more involved with it, and it's not something I've had too much of a chance to look at yet. But I'm not sure if Ben or Steve have got anything to add to this one yet, or if it's a future topic we need to dig into when we revisit conditional access.
I would suggest it'll be a future topic.
Yeah,
this is quite a meaty subject matter.
Yeah.
I support Ben wholeheartedly in presenting this next time. We talk about conditional access. He'll be able to go through and explain it all.
Oh, I will I?
Yeah. As I said, I'll support you to do that. I'll empower you to.
Oh, thank you.
But even if we just sort of switch out to the portal quickly, just so we can take a look at what they're actually referring back to in here. Let's just change one of these things that I'm going to be deleting it anyway.
You say that, and then like in 2 months' time, you're going to go try to do something, and you'll be blocked out, and you'll be like, "Why am I blocked out?"
That? Yeah. Well, that's why I'm glad that everything just defaults to report only. It means I get useful data, or it means I get something showing up in log files, so I can pretend that it was deliberately kept.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
But if we come back into session controls, so down here, so things like the persistent browser session, so always persistent versus never persistent. And then we've also got things like sign-in frequency. And I think it's one of these is, I'll use the Microsoft term. Is it sign-in frequency that's being deprecated? One of the settings here is disappearing.
Sign-in frequency is new.
Okay, I'll have to dig it up because one of the settings here is, or maybe it's the way that you configure it that's changing, but something in this section here is changing. But I've got to go back in and take a look at either it's changing or they're sort of, even though it's just been deployed, they're making different recommendations as to how you actually do the thing that they're suggesting.
So there's a couple of things I want to call out, Mark, while we're here.
Yeah.
So you'll see underneath the use app enforced restrictions, you need to go and set stuff up in Exchange Online and SharePoint to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And with MCAS. So super important to call that out, because otherwise it won't do what you think it will do. It's actually pretty cool in the sense that you can sit there and block people downloading and taking screen grabs of emails and things like that when they're in the browser. The other one that I really want to draw everybody's attention to, Mark, is under the grant. I'm hijacking it a little bit, but
yeah, that's okay.
I'm just wanting to call this one out because I think it's awesome. Is the short EULA. So how many people have had to do EULAs to sign into the computer to say, this is a corporate asset, don't do anything you're not supposed to do on it?
Yeah.
Well, now you can do that via conditional access, and
That's
you can
cool.
make it more trackable, more auditable. And it's not based on signing into the computer. It's when you're actually authenticating to the resource.
Yeah. And for this one, like probably the best use case where I can sort of think this should, if it's not being widely used already, where it needs to be widely used, is when you're inviting guests into your tenant.
Yeah.
Because so let's use Steve and Kwok as examples. As Microsoft employees, you've both signed, Kwok, you would have signed it on a piece of paper. Steve, you would have digitally signed something. Is Phil there? Is Phil online today?
Phil's not on today.
Phil had to etch it into a tablet.
I was going to say he chiseled it, right? He was given
he did.
a bit of slate.
He was given the tablet, literally a tablet.
Yeah, there's a cave over in French's Forest where you'll still find evidence. So you basically have to sign something saying that you are going to be a decent human being. And even though people kind of occasionally do dumb things, most of the time people behave themselves because they know their job is at risk. But as soon as you start inviting people in via B2B, Now, that is just opening up a huge
I can think of another reason why you do it as well, Mark.
Yeah. What's that?
If you've got content that's NDA or
Yeah,
more
yep.
secure. So as an example, say for example, you've gone and put conditional access over your Azure DevOps repo, or Azure DevOps environment, and you go, I don't want people to be doing anything in this Azure DevOps repo without signing off and seeing these the end user license agreement.
Sure.
They can tick the box and you can go, you have to expand it out. You have to have consent on every device, and it's going to expire after X period of time. And then you can start doing conditional access on that.
Yeah. And with the, but so for me though, that scenario that I was mentioning is, think of, so most of the people, let's say like at least a decent portion of you on this call are Microsoft partners. And I'm sure a lot of you have been invited into Microsoft's environment as a guest. Now, depending, let's say that you work for a smaller organization, or I won't pick on Nathan. I'll imagine one of Nathan's employees. Maybe likes to swear a lot, maybe likes to give their opinion on things a lot, and maybe doesn't use the best phrasing for that. Someone like that gets invited into what is normally going to be like a fairly well-controlled and maintained environment, and all of a sudden the rules of their own workplace don't necessarily work well in somebody else's environment.
Yeah.
And this is something that I'm actually shocked that it hasn't been more problematic, because you sort of think of some of the people that you encounter on a daily basis getting invited into somebody else's tenant and wondering, does that person have the ability to switch modes in their brain to go from my
switching
workplace to a corporate workplace type mental state? And there are some people that I don't think have that ability. So for me, that would be like the really, really big one, because employees know what's at risk for them if they mess up, or it's not messing up if you abuse or threaten someone, but somebody outside the organization, inappropriate language, because different orgs, different cultures are going to have different concepts of appropriate and inappropriate language. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's one of the really big reasons, and I can sort of see that being used incredibly broadly for orgs that are into B2B. Now, this is just where you can sort of see where those terms of use, the different settings are. So you'd have to go through, upload the PDF that they need to agree to. Do we want them to agree on every device?
Yes.
Maybe yes, just as a reminder. How long until you re-accept it? And
every day.
Then do we want to enforce it with a conditional access policy?
You better believe we're going to.
Yeah.
Minimum is one.
Yeah. So then that's the way that we can go through and pull that in later. So
I wonder if you can do like 0.5 days. So every half day you have to.
Can you put your mouse over the info? Does it tell you?
Yeah, it didn't have a day, but it's accepting 0.
Does it accept 0.
Yeah, fractions.
Because every 10th of a day.
There is only one way to find out whether that works.
Let's do it. It's in Afrikaans and it's.
Well, that's not going to display to you though.
That's okay. I'm not gonna go all the way with it. I was curious to see, because it wasn't giving me the create option because they didn't have everything populated, and I wasn't sure if that is what would trigger this. So let me just change that to English so we can try to trigger it, because I always have to remind myself that Azure AD portal stuff isn't the same as Azure portal in terms of the way it enforces things.
Yes.
So just do. So as illustrated previously by sort of talking about how you can change the names of policies, whereas Azure doesn't let you change anything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it does. You've just got to recreate it.
That looks like it accepted that 0.1.
That is
Oh,
fine.
here we go.
No.
No, there was a problem. Yeah, it didn't tell me.
If we really wanted to, like, we could dive into and try and figure out what the actual thresholds are.
I've got a feeling that that's probably what the issue would be there.
Yeah.
Nothing else really seemed too problematic in
Or
there.
maybe it didn't like that joke that you did. I thought it was great.
Which one?
African agree.
Oh.
It ended up just being agree.
Okay.
Yes.
But anyway.
Yes, I fixed it.
Fine.
Okay, so I'm not actually going to talk about device compliance here because nothing has changed in this UI. But here's
actually it has. There's also the required password change.
Oh yeah, because this has got Azure AD. Oh yeah, so that's one actually. Yeah, that's something that like CA related. Effectively now with that require password change in here, this is the result of because of the user risk and sign-in risk policies being used to target users and groups of users via CA as opposed to doing your blanket policies through identity protection. That require password change is one of the things that that has showed up because of that.
Yeah. So if your device is unhealthy and or your sign-in risk is too high, we're going to tell you to change password.
Sure.
Okay,
On a compromised computer.
So let's take a look at something that has changed. Now it's still preview. So let me just sort of show you there. So just over here, now we've got external identities. So what this does is it gives us an expanded version of this user settings where, come on, user settings, you can do it.
Yeah.
There with the manage collab settings, where this was kind of an all or nothing. This was like a tenant-wide setting. We couldn't target different settings to different guest tenants that we wanted. But what we can do now with the external identities, and I've already gone through and paired with one already, is if we jump in and take a look at this one and we take a look at the inbound access from this as your subs tenant over to this tenant, I can now start messing around with things such as trust settings to say, I want to customize the settings to say, I want to trust them already having MFA set up for their org. I want to trust their device being compliant against their Intune tenant, and I want to trust their devices being registered against their on-prem AD environment. Also
so it's
being
just
domain
pass through compliance, essentially.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the thing here is that you're basically doing this on a tenant by tenant basis. So the idea here is that we're not giving blanket permission for me. So it's not just me setting up a tenant and having my compliance policy being a four-digit PIN that can be ones. So basically this way, you would only be granting this with this level of trust with orgs that you really want. But what it means is that back over on this side, now why is Endpoint Manager showing so little? That's better. So if we just sort of jump back in over here, one of the challenges that I've seen orgs hit before when they kind of did things without paying too much attention was down here with conditional access. I'll just zoom in so you can actually see. People not realizing the impact if they chose something like all users before they realized. So people would have chosen all users during the early days of their tenant before they started inviting B2B guests in, not realizing that if they then use something like grant and require device to be marked as compliant, that no B2B guest would have a compliant device unless you were giving them a device that could be marked as compliant. So basically here, this was something where people were sort of making one wrong setting over in who it should be applied to. So effectively, it meant you had to sort of start coming up with creative ways of, what policies do we create for external users versus internal users. But in this case, they remember that, that here, that required device to be marked as compliant, that I'd have to go through and, trust, have a much deeper level of trust with these, these different orgs that I'm going to be adding in here. And part of this could be opening up lines of communication between the IT teams on both sides. And I think, and once you sort of think through these scenarios, you can sort of see, at least initially, you can figure out what kind of organizations are going to allow this. And it can't just be like, so again, let's just use Microsoft. So Microsoft, I'd hate to think of the number of guest users and guest users and the number of tenants they're coming into the Microsoft.com Azure AD tenant. We'd be talking, I'd say conservatively, and Kwok or Steve, if you've got any idea, would you say that there'd have to be tens to hundreds of thousands of guest users in your tenant
at any given time?
Yeah.
At any given time, potentially, yes.
Yeah. So and a lot of those, would be a lot of them would be like individuals from one external tenant, not necessarily thousands of people coming from one tenant, even though that would be possible as well. So for me, this kind of thing, it's not going to be for that, for the tail end. It's not going to be for the 99,000 different orgs. It's going to be for the couple of orgs that have got a large number of users, are trusted by your own org IT department. We trust that group is doing things appropriately. So this is something that's not going to fix misconfiguration issues, but it's going to allow better integration of proper. So I guess people who, we're getting more to, the kind of trust that we would have had as a federation type trust when we start setting this up, in terms of, the degree of trust, we have for that, not at the technology level, but in, personal trust of that org. That's what we're kind of trying to move towards with this. But in this case, you can see that this is something that is going to simplify things over on the Azure AD side for conditional access. So this is fairly new. So I don't know when this was announced, because it could have been sitting there for a long time. But I'll just work on the assumption that it was probably put there in November during the Ignite timeframe. That seems to be a pretty good answer to a lot of those kind of guesses at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anything else that anyone wants? Has anyone had a chance to actually look at this yet?
No.
Yeah.
Do you want to start from the top for mixed E3 and E5 customers?
Yeah, no. Hang on. And we also need to have F1 licenses as well covered in there.
Oh God.
Can we also, while we're on this, hey, that alert on the screen that you're looking at that you're on right now, this is really important, and I don't think enough people realize that it's going to happen. TLS 1.0, 1.1, and 3 DES deprecation. This means that things won't work if you're not prepared for it. This is so outside of the scope of what we've been talking about today, but this is a big one. We've run into it a lot. We've got a lot of our customers are using Server 2012 to host the publisher, and that just natively needs to be uplifted to support the newer TLS ciphers. And I'm not gonna take over or anything, but I just wanted to point out that this is really important. If you don't,
I'm going to add a little cherry on top of that for everybody running Windows 10, which I assume is everybody on the call. The cumulative update middle of the year is going to be removing Internet Explorer. We've been very open about this, but Internet Explorer is being deprecated from Windows 10 from June.
It's awesome.
So if you still have applications that need IE mode, like one of my customers, I would strongly recommend that you go and review that and understand if it's going to work in Edge without IE on there.
Sure. Does that mean that the native, like when you make calls external to a browser, that it uses Edge as the default engine now?
I believe so.
Okay. Because it's something
not
we've run into as
Dug
well.
into it.
Sure.
Yeah, I've not dug into it. The thing to note is it's not going anywhere for Server OS. Server OS is still going to have Internet Explorer support until the end of life for I think until Server 2019 is end of support.
Yeah, true.
But okay, yeah, so it's super important to call that out because you will have people that are still running systems. Like one of my customers that didn't update their CRM platform for 10 years and then sitting there and going, what do you mean it doesn't work without Internet Explorer?
Yeah. I mean, it's another thing as well, thinking about it from an external scenario. So a lot of websites will have their SSL setups only using modern or preferring modern over anything else, and if your environments aren't set up to support those ciphers, then they will literally just not resolve those websites or services. I mean, my scenario is services fail, but websites will fail as well, so it's it's a big one. Nathan, I'm not sure if you can. I'm sure you can do a report on the CA stuff.
Conditional access or certificate authority? Nathan?
Conditional access.
Okay. I don't think conditional access currently does do TLS reporting. It's not going down to that level of granularity unless you do I think though, when you do an AAD auth, we capture what protocol was used for authentication.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it was...
Is that, or I'm seeing it in Defender for Endpoint or something like that?
Defender for Endpoint definitely 100% has it. But I don't think conditional access does it.
Yeah, I've seen it somewhere where you can turn on reporting for those kind of things so that you can actually see who's still using them. A bit like you could use to turn on conditional access report only for those using
legacy apps.
Legacy apps and not using modern authentication and stuff like that.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm 99% sure that's going to be in Defender for Endpoint. It's not going to be in conditional access, because you want to capture not just where you're authenticating, you're wanting to capture any websites that are still using TLS 1 and 1.1 as well as 3DES. And that's going to be more through your Defender for Endpoint than for anything else.
Yeah.
Pretty sad. When I first started, 3DES was the strongest encryption we had.
Strongest encryption allowed.
Yeah.
Because 3DES, while it was always there, there was always encryptions that were more stronger that just weren't allowed beyond the military.
Sure.
The government.
That was 9DES.
Yeah.
Or 4DES.
I use 10DES, but
yeah. I use 7DES.
Okay, so not too many slides left here, and the next two are kind of things that have been around for a while, so we don't need to spend too much time on them. All I really wanted to sort of cover off here with the final two, with the approved client app and then the app protection policies, was just a gentle reminder that while there is overlap in the client app listing, it is not an identical list. And the reason why I say that is something that you can probably figure out, is that people saying, I swore this thing worked in another tenant I configured, but now I can't get it working. And it's like, okay, just make sure that you're looking at the list, or at the correct list. And the problem is they both come from the same page in Docs. So if someone has scrolled a little bit too high or a little bit too low, you're potentially looking at the wrong list. So here with the client app list, this one is probably this one's got the more extensive list. But when we get to app protection policy, this one is a smaller list overall, or in terms of what's published, but potentially this is a much larger list, because this is where you can put your SDK, if you're doing your own SDK wrapping of apps as well. That would also, they would also be things on this list. Now, this is a list that for some reason I thought would have expanded a lot further than what it has.
It is a lot longer than that.
Sorry?
There is more apps than that. If you go into the Intune application protection policy app list, there's a lot more apps than that.
Okay, so in that case, then the Azure AD team just isn't updating their.
Yes,
their
I
docs.
didn't say that, but that would be what I would be assuming.
Steve's trying to start a fight.
No, I'm not.
No. If that's the case, look, it wouldn't surprise me if there were, if nobody had really nudged the docs team to basically to pull the updated list like that. That wouldn't come as a surprise.
Yeah.
That's
So
fine. Just do a pull.
let me grab the link for that.
Yeah, because this is what the so this is what I pulled from the Azure AD documentation, and I was looking at it going, that's like, it seems like a smaller list than the last time I looked at it.
Sure.
I always forget how to set this up. And we have a link, and we don't have a link. Yeah, so on my tenant, we've got like Adobe products, we've got Box, we've got board papers. If you can bring up a tenant, Mark, and go to that create policy for application protection policies, you'll see the list there.
Yeah, so I was just doing that off screen.
Sorry. Yeah, I would share my screen, but I'm not allowed to.
Oh, no, no. And I wasn't, I was doing it off screen because I didn't know what else would show up. So,
yeah, I hear you.
Mine is a way less sensitive one than yours. Let's just take a look at.
So if you go selected apps where you are, and then you'll see that one above it. Go back. Oh, there you go. Actually, you go all apps. And then there's the view list of apps that will be targeted.
That's a much better list.
Yep. And I believe that Quack has put the link into the chat.
Certainly has.
Okay, so moral of this story, go back to the source, not the product that integrates with the source.
I mean, the other thing as well is to potentially grab a list of these apps and then do a pull request on the document, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do later.
Okay, so so with that then, so good news then is that list is kind of let's just say it's potentially a frozen in time list from who knows how long ago, because we'll see. But even in here though, so some of the names have been updated versus what they would have been previously. But who knows?
Who knows?
Maybe someone just did a pull request on outdated product names that have been updated.
Probably.
As opposed to actually just someone went, oh, brand is broken, fix brand, as opposed to list is broken, fix list.
Is somebody just grabbed that repo and did a Control F?
Yeah.
Sorry, Control H, Control and found and replaced old product name for new product name.
In fact, Mark, if you can grab me the URL to that where you got that from, I will do that pull request tomorrow.
Yep. I've got that in my.
Got to get those
notes.
contributions up.
Oh
Yeah, you do. I'm surprised you aren't fighting over it.
Oh, I can't be bothered. Let me.
Someone's on holiday. I'll let him do his thing.
Just drop it into chat now for you.
Cool, thank you.
So actually, this is where that first bullet point is covering everything that's not Microsoft. Wrapped apps. Because what has to happen for application protection policies to take effect is they need to have an SDK built into them for the connections, or they need to be wrapped so that the communication between our services are controlled.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I added that to the list. That wasn't on the list.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I mainly added it because my OCD was being triggered because one of those lists was one item shorter than the other. So I had to come up with something to add to balance them out. See, nice and neat, and it serves a purpose. Okay, so that's it in terms of the slides, etc. So we don't have any more official content, so it's time just to sort of switch over for the next few minutes. I'll stop the recording just in case anyone's got questions that they want to ask that they don't want recorded to potentially come back and haunt them. So just give me a second to just stop the recording, and then we can just sort of go into whatever other conversations we need to have.
Thank you.